Your doctor checked your blood sugar last year. It came back fine. And you still nearly fell getting out of the shower last. I have spent 21 years in endocrinology watching a specific metabolic mechanism silently destroy balance, gait, and muscle control in people who were told their labs looked normal. The mechanism your 15-minute appointment never covered. Here is what most people believe. Balance declines after 60 because of aging. Joints wear down. Reflexes slow. It is just what happens. And there is some truth in that. But the evidence says pretty much the opposite of what you have been told about why it happens so fast and why it happens to some people and not others. The real driver is not age. It is chronically elevated insulin, quietly working on your peripheral nerves, your muscle fibers, and the motor circuits in your brain before your glucose ever leaves the normal range. By the time your doctor sees a problem in your blood work, that process has been running for years. In this video, I am going to show you the 3 layers of that mechanism, what the research actually found, and the one number you need to ask your doctor to measure at your next visit. Not glucose, not A1C, a different number entirely. Stay with me. Now, the first layer of this mechanism is the one researchers have known about longest, but that almost nobody connects to balance outside a specialist office. It is called peripheral neuropathy. And most people think it only affects diabetics. That is not what the research shows. A 2016 review published in Current Diabetes Reports, PMID 2678679, laid out something important. Older adults with type 2 diabetes have significantly higher fall incidence than those without. But isolated studies kept finding a problem the field was ignoring. Adults without overt diabetes and without any confirmed neuropathy diagnosis were also falling at elevated rates. The same sensory motor disruption was present. The mechanism was running below the diagnostic threshold. Here is what is actually happening. Chronically elevated insulin does not wait for you to become diabetic before it starts damaging small nerve fibers. Insulin resistance creates a low-grade inflammatory environment. That inflammation attacks the myelin sheath, the protective coating around peripheral nerves, gradually and silently. The nerves that suffer first are the longest ones in your body, the ones running to your feet. Those nerves carry proprioceptive signals. They tell your brain where your foot is in space, whether it is on flat ground or a slight incline, whether your heel has landed or your toes are drifting forward. When those signals degrade, your brain is navigating with a map that is increasingly out of date. You are not losing balance because your muscles are weak. You are losing balance because your nervous system is receiving corrupted data. And that is not a minor finding. The dangerous part is the timing. Proprioceptive loss from insulin-driven neuropathy begins years, sometimes a decade, before neuropathy shows up on standard clinical screening. By the time a doctor notices numbness or tingling in your toes, the balance disruption has already been building. I know what you are thinking right now. You are thinking, I do not have diabetes. My glucose is fine, so this does not apply to me. That is exactly what 88% of adults with metabolic dysfunction think. And most of them are wrong. Moving on to the second layer, which is where the research gets particularly important for anyone over 60. Insulin resistance does not just attack your nerves, it attacks your muscle. A study published in the European Journal of Clinical Nutrition analyzing 844 community-dwelling older adults, PMID 2852778, measured skeletal muscle index, gait speed, and grip strength alongside HOMA-IR. The ratio of fasting insulin to fasting glucose, the most accurate, non-invasive measure of insulin resistance we have. The finding was direct. Older adults in the highest tertile of HOMA-IR had significantly lower skeletal muscle mass and significantly worse gait speed than those in the lowest tertile. The combination of physical inactivity and elevated insulin resistance produced the worst functional outcomes across every measure tested. Here is the mechanism. Skeletal muscle is the primary site of insulin-mediated glucose disposal. When your muscle cells become insulin-resistant, 2 things happen simultaneously. First, glucose uptake drops. Second, and this is the part most videos skip over, muscle protein synthesis drops as well. Insulin is anabolic. When your cells stop responding to it properly, the signal that tells your muscle fibers to repair and rebuild gets weaker. You are not just storing less glucose efficiently. You are losing the biological signal that maintains the muscle you already have. The result is a specific type of muscle loss called sarcopenic insulin resistance. It is not the same as normal age-related sarcopenia, your hip stabilizers, your ankle dorsiflexors, the muscle that keeps you upright when your foot hits an uneven surface. A 2025 cross-sectional study reviewing associations between diabetic neuropathy and balance in type 2 diabetics, identified via PMC 1269-2654, found that the risk of sarcopenia is 1.5 to 2 times higher in patients with type 2 diabetes compared to those. And that relationship tracks with insulin resistance, not just with the diabetes diagnosis itself. Two systems failing at once, quietly, below the threshold of any routine blood test to your doctor. And there is a third layer, and this one connects everything. I will show you that third mechanism in a moment, the one that involves your brain directly, not your nerves, not your muscles, your motor circuits. But before I get there, I need you to understand something about how those three layers interact, because that changes what you ask your doctor to measure. The third layer is the one that surprised me most when I read the research. A 2022 mechanistic review of existing literature published in Biomedicines, PMID 3600-9469, from the Department of Pharmacology and Nutritional Sciences at the University of Kentucky, laid out a mechanism that most clinicians, myself included, were not trained to connect to gait and balance. Central insulin resistance. Insulin resistance in the brain itself. Your cerebellum and motor cortex have insulin receptors. Those receptors are part of how your brain regulates movement, timing, and motor coordination. When insulin resistance extends into the central nervous system, and the research now shows it does in many older adults with metabolic dysfunction, those circuits start to underperform. What does that look like in practice? Slower motor initiation, impaired recovery from a stumble, and the motor circuits coordinating the response are themselves running at reduced efficiency. This is the full picture. Not one mechanism, three, all driven by the same upstream cause, chronically elevated insulin before glucose ever becomes abnormal. A 2016 review in Current Diabetes Reports, PMID 2678679, put it plainly, of multiple sensor motor and cognitive processes, and insulin-related dysfunction disrupts multiple nodes in that system simultaneously. In 21 years of treating metabolic dysfunction, this is what I see consistently. A patient comes in with a fall history. Let me walk you through an illustrative scenario. A 67-year-old man, let us call him Robert, retired engineer, exercises 3 times a week. He came to my clinic not because he felt sick, but because his wife had noticed he was grabbing door frames when he walked through them. Not because stumbling, just reaching. His glucose was 101, his A1C was 5.7, both technically in the normal range or just at the edge. I ordered a fasting insulin panel. His fasting insulin was 18 microunits per milliliter. His HOMA-IR was 4.6, both significantly elevated. His glucose looked fine because his pancreas was still compensating, pumping out extra insulin to keep glucose controlled. But that extra insulin had been chronically elevated for years. What the standard blood work showed? Nothing alarming. What the fasting insulin showed? A metabolic system under significant stress, with the exact profile that research links to peripheral nerve degradation, accelerated muscle loss, and impaired central motor signaling. Robert had not had a fall yet. This is how I would actually approach this if I were sitting across from you right now. First, ask your doctor to measure your fasting insulin at your next visit. Not just glucose, not just A1C, fasting insulin specifically. This requires an 8-hour fast before the blood draw. Many standard metabolic panels do not include it by default. You have to ask. A fasting insulin above 10 microunits per milliliter begins to suggest meaningful insulin resistance in many adults, though reference ranges vary by laboratory and clinical context. Above 15, the research consistently links elevated fasting insulin to the downstream effects we discussed today. And with your physician what those numbers mean for your specific situation. Second, ask them to calculate your HOMA-IR. The formula: fasting insulin multiplied by fasting glucose divided by 405. A score above 2.5 is a signal worth discussing with your doctor. A score above 3.5 puts you in the range where studies consistently find accelerated sarcopenia and sensor motor deficit. 2 or more stumbles in the past 12 months, that is the number I use clinically. 2 is a pattern, not bad luck. 2 stumbles, plus an elevated HOMA-IR, is a specific clinical picture that warrants attention before it becomes a fall with consequences. None of this requires a prescription. None of it requires medication of any kind. It requires one additional number on a standard blood and the knowledge of what it means. It costs you nothing and has 0 side effects. The mechanism in your 15-minute appointment, never covered, is measurable. And what is measurable is addressable. I get this question in the comments every week, so let me answer it directly. If my glucose is normal, why would my doctor even agree to run fasting insulin? Here is what to say. Tell them, dear doctor, you have read research linking insulin resistance, measured via HOMA-IR, to accelerated muscle loss and impaired proprioception in adults over 60. And you would like a fasting insulin added to your next metabolic panel to calculate your use the term HOMA-IR. Doctors respond differently when a patient has clearly done their homework. You now know something most people your age that do not. And that knowledge gives you the power to ask better questions. Your doctor is measuring the wrong thing. Not because they do not care. Because the system they trained in was built around glucose as the primary metabolic marker. Glucose is a late-stage signal. By the time it is elevated, the mechanisms we discussed today, peripheral nerve degradation, sarcopenic muscle loss, central motor circuit impairment, have been running for years. Fasting insulin is the early warning. HOMA-IR is the map. And the destination you are trying to avoid is not a fall. It is the trajectory that makes a fall more likely every year. Your standard labs continue to show nothing alarming. If you found this useful, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. What I cover here does not fit in a 15-minute appointment. It is the mechanism your doctor would explain if the system gave them the time. Next week, I am going to show you the specific dietary pattern that most directly drives fasting insulin down in adults over 60, without medication, and without eliminating the foods you actually like. You do not want to miss it.